Clara Ellison had never been free. From the moment she could walk in heels, her life had been rehearsed, choreographed to perfection, beneath the crystal chandeliers of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Daughter of Maxwell Ellison, the man behind Ellison Media Group, Clara wasn't just his only child, she was his legacy, his leverage, his brand. She lived in a penthouse above Fifth Avenue where the skyline stretched like a promise, but every window felt like a wall. Her days moved in silence and schedules, her nights in gowns she didn't pick, dining with people who never saw her, only the image her father shaped. She was beauty without voice, elegance without choice, a perfectly polished symbol of power, raised not to live but to represent. No one asked her what she wanted, not in 26 years. Her dreams had been pressed flat beneath magazine covers and gala spotlights. She didn't remember the last time she spoke without being told what to say. To the world, Clara was the poised daughter of a media empire, flawless, untouchable, smiling from the sidelines of every success her father claimed as his own. But behind closed doors, the silence cut deeper. She had never made a mistake, never broken a rule, not because she was perfect, but because the cost of imperfection had always been too high. She had never fallen in love, never stayed up late, whispering secrets to someone who wanted to know her, not her pedigree. She had never felt ownership of her own life. And the cruelest truth? She didn't even remember what freedom felt like, because you can't miss what you've never known. Until the night her father walked into her room with eyes that no longer carried pride, but panic. And 6 words that would unmake everything. "You're getting married this weekend, Clara." Clara didn't ask why. She didn't have to. She saw it in her father's face, the cracks in the mask he had worn for decades. The empire he had built on headlines and image was crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Maxwell Ellison had always believed himself untouchable, but the world had finally caught up. Fraud allegations, leaked documents, investors pulling out faster than he could spin a press release. And the press, the same beast he'd once tamed, was now feasting on his fall. Clara watched him, searching for something human, remorse, guilt, but all she saw was exhaustion, desperation dressed in a $1,000 suit. "This is the only way," he said, his voice strangely detached. "He's agreed to take on the company's debt in exchange for you." The words were soft, matter-of-fact, as if she were collateral. Not a daughter, not even a person, just currency. Clara's throat tightened, but she stayed still. Damian Hart. The name alone turned the room cold. CEO of Hartwell Capital, known for swallowing dying companies whole and spitting out their bones, polished and profitable, ruthless, brilliant, unreadable. She'd met him once, a brief, forgettable exchange at a media summit. He'd shaken her hand and looked at her like she was already his. She remembered the chill that trailed his gaze. Now he would be her husband. "The wedding is Saturday," Maxwell continued. "There won't be time for a ceremony, just paperwork, signatures, the essentials." A contrast dressed in white. He wouldn't even look at her when he said it. Clara stood numb. The air in the room felt thinner. Her heart wasn't broken. It was barricaded. "You said I'd have a choice," she whispered. "You promised." Maxwell finally met her eyes, and for one brief moment she saw the man beneath the mogul, the father who once held her when she cried over skinned knees. "I'm sorry," he said. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Because Clara wasn't being married. She was being surrendered. The wedding came and went like a storm, without thunder. No flowers, no vows, no celebration, just a sterile conference room in the upper floors of Hartwell Tower, filled with sharp suits and silent stares. Clara signed her name next to Damian's without looking up. Her dress was ivory, elegant, expensive. Not chosen. Her future was sealed with ink and silence. By sunset, she was no longer Clara Ellison. She was Mrs. Damian Hart. A sleek black car waited outside. The ride was quiet, save for the sound of tires against pavement and the steady ticking of time slipping away. When they arrived at his penthouse, cold glass and steel rising above the city, Clara stepped out like a shadow. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere anymore. The bedroom door clicked shut behind her. Spacious, minimalist, sterile, like him. She didn't turn when she heard him enter, but she felt him, the shift in the air, the gravity of presence. Damian didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, loosening his tie, watching her. Not with cruelty, not with kindness. Just ownership, like she was something he had already acquired. "You really thought you'd sleep alone tonight?" he asked. Voice smooth, low, devoid of doubt. Clara turned slightly, instinct tugging her backward, but her back met the cold wall. Damian moved closer, unhurried, deliberate, his eyes locked onto hers with a calm certainty that chilled her more than rage ever could. "You're my wife," he murmured, closing the space between them, "and I always take care of what's mine." She froze, her breath tangled in her chest. Her heart thundered in betrayal, not of him, but of herself, because when he touched her, she didn't stop him. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, heat blooming beneath fear, confusion blooming beneath control. She should have screamed, fought, run, but she didn't. And that was what terrified her most. Not his power, but her reaction to it. Clara expected distance. She expected demands, orders, control. A continuation of what had started that first night, where her body had betrayed her fear and he had taken what was never freely given. But, instead, came silence. Damian didn't touch her again. Not that night, not the next. Not at all. He was there, always there, but in quiet proximity, present but never invasive. A ghost in pressed shirts and perfect posture, always just at the edge of her awareness. Each morning, she woke to find breakfast waiting, toast golden and crisp, fruit fresh, cut with meticulous care, and a cup of Earl Grey, steeped exactly 3 minutes. She hadn't told him that, not once, but he knew. One morning, her eyes narrowed at the porcelain cup between her hands. "You made this?" Damian glanced up from his seat across the table, his expression unreadable, voice low. "You're my wife," he said. "Who else would I trust to get it right?" There was no smirk, no superiority. Just quiet certainty, like it was obvious, natural. Like care was not something earned, but something he offered without question. Later that week, a thunderstorm rolled through Manhattan. The wind howled across the terrace, knocking over a potted plant with a loud crash. Clara stepped out, barefoot, shivering, unaware of the rain soaking her sleeves. She didn't hear him come up behind her, but suddenly a coat draped over her shoulders, warm, heavy, shielding. She turned. Damian stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. When she pulled the coat tighter and stepped back inside, he didn't follow. Just watched her, his eyes not hard, but haunted. And when the fever came, quick and unrelenting, he stayed by her side the entire night. He cooled her skin, held her hand, whispered her name like it was something fragile. She drifted in and out of sleep, her thoughts tangled in heat and memory. She didn't remember the words he murmured, but she remembered the look in his eyes. Not like something he owned, but like something he might lose. And in that haze of half-sleep and honesty, a single question rose like a whisper in her chest. Was this who he had always been? Or was he only becoming this man because of her? She wasn't sure what scared her more, that she was finally seeing the real Damian Hart. Or that maybe, just maybe, he had never shown that man to anyone else before. The call came on a quiet morning, but it splintered the stillness like glass cracking under pressure. Clara sat at the breakfast table, staring into a cup of tea she hadn't touched, while across the room, Damian answered his phone with the calm precision she had come to recognize. Cold, composed, efficient. But this time, something broke through the surface. His hand tightened around the edge of the marble counter, knuckles pale. She heard the change in his tone before she caught the words. "No," he said, low but sharp. "That's not happening. She's not going anywhere." He ended the call with a heavy thud, eyes dark as storm clouds. His voice followed, flat and final. "Your father, he's coming for you. He's hired lawyers." Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. She had known, somehow, that her silence wouldn't last forever. Maxwell Ellison was not a man who surrendered, especially not what he believed he owned. "Isn't the contract enough?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Damian didn't answer at first. Then came a bitter smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maxwell doesn't believe in permanence, only in control. He thinks he can undo all of this, like you're a deal gone bad. She didn't reply, but something inside her stirred. Not fear, not even anger. It was older than that, a bone-deep exhaustion of being passed between men who never truly saw her. The boardroom in Ellison Tower hadn't changed, but Clara had. She stepped into that space and felt the old air press against her skin like a second skin she had long outgrown. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, shoulders stiff, face gaunt with damage and pride. His voice, when he spoke, was low, calculated. "Clara, you don't have to stay with him. You can come home." Home, as if it had ever truly been one. Before she could speak, Damian moved closer, his hand a quiet weight at her lower back. "She's not leaving." Her father's eyes sharpened. "I'll fight to break this. She deserves better." Clara inhaled, the moment stretched. She felt them both, one behind her, one in front, waiting, expecting. But this time, she didn't shake. "You don't get to trade me anymore," she said to her father, her voice clear and unwavering. Then, turning to Damian, soft, steady, strong. "And neither do you." And just like that, she turned and walked away. Not as a daughter, not as a wife, but as a woman reclaiming her name. Clara didn't run, she simply walked away. No drama, no confrontation, no final words. Just quiet steps into a world that, for once, she would choose for herself. She didn't take much, just a coat, her phone, and the space to breathe. It was strange, the way freedom felt so quiet. No roaring rebellion, no shouting goodbye. Only the silence of finally saying no without needing permission. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that it needed to be far from men who saw her as leverage, far from towers of glass and family legacies that had always caged more than they protected. So she found herself in Vermont, tucked behind an old chapel she'd once mentioned on a restless night when sleep never came. A lavender garden had lived in her memory ever since, a quiet place, fragrant and untouched, where the world felt small enough for her to matter again. She stood alone among the blooms as dusk crept over the sky, her shoes forgotten in the grass, the wind tugging gently at the loose strands of her hair. For the first time in years, she was still, whole, hers. And then she felt it, the shift in the air, the presence that didn't need to speak to be known. He was there. Damian didn't say a word at first. He simply stood at the edge of the field, watching her as if afraid that any movement might make her vanish again. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than she remembered, like something inside him had broken. "You told me about this place once," he said. "I didn't think you meant it, but I hoped." Clara didn't turn. Her voice was calm. "Why did you come?" He stepped forward, slowly. "Because you're not a contract. You're not a solution. You're the one thing I can't afford to lose." She turned then, not in anger but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally remembered her worth. "Then why did you treat me like I didn't have a choice?" Damian didn't answer with excuses. He didn't beg. Instead, he sank to his knees among the lavender, head bowed, not in defeat, but in surrender. "I don't know how to love the right way," he whispered, "but I know what it feels like to lose you, and I can't do it again." Clara froze. For a brief second, something ached in her chest. Not pity, not fear, but recognition. Because in his silence she saw her own. Years of being voiceless, controlled, offered up without choice, and now here he was, offering something she'd never been given. Himself, without conditions. Clara stepped closer, her voice steady. "If you want me, Damian, love me like I'm free." And for the first time, he looked up, not as a man who had claimed her, but as one asking to be chosen. The morning air was still when the cars arrived, sleek, black, and official. They rolled through the iron gates of Damian's estate with quiet arrogance, as if the outcome had already been decided. Clara stood by the window, the steam from her tea curling in the cold light, watching as her father's lawyers stepped out in tailored suits, briefcases in hand. They came not as messengers, but as men sent to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. She didn't move at first, but she didn't flinch either. Not like she once would have. Behind her, Damian hovered in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in the way they did when he was trying not to interfere. He had said nothing since she returned. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood. This fight wasn't his to lead. Clara placed her cup down gently and walked toward the door. Her steps were calm, deliberate, the kind that came from knowing you no longer owed anyone your obedience. Outside, the lawyers turned at the sound of her heels on stone. One stepped forward. "Miss Ellison," he said briskly, "your father has prepared the annulment documents. If you come with us now, we can dissolve this immediately." She looked at him, at the sharp suit, the cold tone, the assumption behind every word. Then she looked past him, to the house behind her, to the man inside who, for once, was waiting without pushing, hoping, but not demanding. 3 months ago, she might have hesitated. 3 weeks ago, she might have looked to someone else for direction. But not today. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. "I choose to stay." A beat of silence fell across the driveway. The lawyer blinked, caught off guard. Another shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke. Because what was there to argue with when the person they'd come to retrieve no longer belonged to anyone but herself? Claire turned and walked back toward the house. This time, no one followed her, no one tried to stop her. When she reached the door, Damian was still there, waiting. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with triumph, it was with awe. Because she hadn't returned as someone who had been won. She had returned as someone who had chosen. 3 years later, the lavender fields were in full bloom again. Clara stood barefoot in the grass, the scent of sun-warmed petals curling around her like a memory. Her dress fluttered in the soft wind, light and free, like her. Laughter echoed across the field as 2 small figures ran between the rows, chasing butterflies and shouting each other's names like secrets. Noah and Luna, her 3-year-old twins, wild and fearless, exactly as children should be. Behind her, Damian wrapped his arms gently around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He never needed to. His silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full of presence, full of peace. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Clara asked, eyes still on the children. Damian breathed in the lavender. "Every day," he said quietly, "and every day, I still can't believe it." From the far edge of the field came another voice, gruff, familiar, softer than it used to be. "Easy, Luna, that one's got thorns." Clara turned and smiled. Maxwell Ellison stood among the flowers, sleeves rolled up, a ridiculous straw hat perched on his once proud head. In his arms, Luna squirmed, her fingers clutching a half-crushed flower. He laughed, freely, without image or pride. A laugh Clara hadn't heard since before she knew what it meant to be sold. It hadn't come easily. It had taken months before Maxwell called, and when he didn't offer explanations or ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "I don't know if I deserve to be your father anymore, but I'd like to try." And he did try. Today, he was just Grandpa Max, with grass stains on his knees and cookie crumbs in his pockets. Clara watched them, her children, her father, her husband, and felt no lingering bitterness. Only a quiet, steady kind of joy. Because from everything that once shattered her, every silence, every choice made without her, she had gathered the pieces and built something whole. Not perfect, but wholly, fiercely hers.